Welcome back, everybody. This is The Changelog. We're a member-supported blog and podcast that covers what's fresh and what's new in open source. This show is hosted by myself, Adam Stacoviak, and Andrew Thorp. Andrew, say hello.
Hey, how's it going, man?
Today's a good day, man. It's a very, very good day.
Very exciting day. Big day.
Yeah, big day. Big day. You can tune into this show live every Tuesday. That's right, every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, right here on 5x5. You can check out our past shows at 5x5.tv/changelog. And this episode is number 89, not 0.8.9. Can you believe that?
No, it's hash 89.
Hash 89.
Oh, and, inside joke.
Yeah, and for those who've been listening to the Changelog forever and forever and forever, and for those who went and listened or read today's announcement, we don't SEM version our semantically version our podcast. So we dropped that, moved to 5x5, and now this is just episode 89. So, and today we're joined by Solomon Hykes, a hacker, of course, and entrepreneur at DotCloud.
Hey guys, it's great to be here.
It is great. So Solomon, where do we begin to tell the story of DotCloud and what you're doing with Docker?
Where do we begin?
Yeah, where do we begin?
Well,
can we start with you maybe? Maybe give
sorry?
an intro to. Maybe start with you. Give an intro of who you are and kind of what you do at DotCloud.
Sure. So I'm the founder, and DotCloud is my baby. It's been my baby for the last 5 years. So about 5 years ago, I quit my job and set out to work on all things DevOps and deployment automation in cloud and that kind of stuff. And I guess I could give you the long version of that, but fast forward to 2010, after about 2 years of tinkering and running a bootstrapped consulting business, toying with interesting technology and experimenting. Eventually, we launched a product. We launched a platform as a service. So, if you know products like Heroku or Google App Engine or Microsoft Azure, we launched a platform that lets developers upload their web application very easily. And the platform takes care of deploying it, configuring the servers, scaling it, and all that fun stuff, freeing the developer that burden so that the developer can do what he does best, which is write awesome code. So we've launched that in 2010, and our claim to fame at the time was that we were the first platform as a service to support multiple languages. So, at the time, Heroku was really big in the Ruby community. Google App Engine was doing interesting stuff with Python, but you had to heavily modify your app. You had to use their custom APIs, etc. And there were a lot of developers out there who were eager to get their hands on something similar, something that made their lives super easy with their respective languages. And we delivered that, and there was a lot of buzz around that. And fast forward to late 2012 and early 2013. And we're doing that. We're growing the business, growing the user base, etc. And all this time, we're getting more and more requests for something very specific. We're getting a lot of people interested in the secret sauce, the not the platform itself, but the ingredients to build your own platform. But sometimes because people would not agree with the way we did pricing, or usually they had custom needs. You can't be the provider for every every developer out there, every company that needs to deploy an app. That's a little bit ambitious. Anyway, we started getting requests for the ingredients to building your own platform, and eventually we decided that was a smart move to make, and we started open sourcing stuff. And one of the components we open sourced is a project called Docker, which is basically, you could call it our secret sauce, but it's from a technology point of view, you could argue it's not that big of a deal, but there's a lot of work that goes into taking a kind of arcane and complicated technology and delivering it in a simple way to developers. So anyway, that was kind of like the super fast forward version from
super fast forward version.
Yeah, you know, we can go in like 1,000 different directions here, but
you kind of glossed over the fact though that like for those who may not have caught up with DotCloud and with what they're doing with Docker, I mean, you gave a talk at PyCon not long ago, which was kind of when a lot of this buzz began to really hype up for you. I wouldn't say it's the start of your story, but you know, you had this talk called The Future of Linux Containers, and you wowed everybody. Like, everybody was floored with what you delivered. And if Kenneth was on this show right now, he'd be saying the same thing, as I'm sure that he was there at PyCon. So, you know, tell us about that. What do you mean by the future of Linux containers?
So what I mean by the future of Linux containers is, well, I guess I should start by describing what Linux containers are. There was this thing called virtualization, and you know, it lets you basically create a virtual computer, and that had a lot of benefits for companies that operated a lot of computers, because you could consolidate hardware, and you know, instead of spending tens of thousands for dozens of servers, all of a sudden you can spend much less for a smaller number of actual computers and pretend you had more, right? And on top of that, the promise of virtual machines was that developers could package their application along with all the dependencies, everything from, you know, the libraries you use, the app server that runs your app, the exact version of the exact system library that your application depends on, all the way down to the distro and the underlying system. The whole thing packaged in you know, a single object, something that you can hand to someone else and say, "Here, run this," and it's reusable. And that's kind of the key to reliable testing. You know, it's the key to component reuse between projects. It's the key to making money with your software, because all of a sudden other people can pay you to use it, to reuse it. There was a lot of excitement initially around what you could do with VMs, and that part of using VMs never really materialized, because VMs aren't really that, you know, that's not really the point of VMs. From a technology point of view, they have a few downsides. They're big, you know, they take a lot of disk space. Running them uses up a lot of memory, a lot of CPU. There's a lot of overhead. If you've ever, you know, simulated a complex system, you know, using VMware or VirtualBox on your laptop, you know what I'm talking about. The battery goes away really fast. Yep. They're not really portable. Anyway, so it never really took off as the way developers share their work. You know, I don't ever remember putting my code into a VM and like handing it to a lot of people and saying, "Hey, here's the official way to use my code," right? So we're still in this world of fragmented ways to package and share and reuse code, and we're still in dependency hell and these kinds of problems. You know, Python developers have Python packages. Ruby developers have Ruby packages. Everyone has to deal with Ubuntu packages or Debian packages or Red Hat or etc. And then you have to compile stuff by hand sometimes. It's just a mess. And enter Linux containers. So what Linux containers are, they are the Linux kernel's answer to this problem, or, you know, more specifically to the problem of subdividing a single system, a single OS, into multiple areas that are completely sandboxed from each other, so that you can run, you know, multiple applications side by side inside the same OS, right? Running on top of the same kernel, without application A messing with application B in any way. And if you think about iPhone or Android apps, that's kind of how they work, right? Your apps never interact with each other. They don't touch each other's files. You can remove, you know, you can add any combination of apps. They don't interact with each other. They just don't mess with each other. And that's what Linux containers enable. And I would add that every modern operating system, at least every modern Unix operating system, has a facility like Linux containers. You know, the BSD systems have a similar mechanism called jails. In fact, BSD fans will tell you they've had jails for way longer than Linux had Linux containers. Solaris has zones. And
so is this like taking all those different metaphors for different platforms and creating like one homogeneous API to all of that? Is that what the point of Docker is?
That's what the point of Docker is. So I guess my where I was getting was there is now the possibility of creating such an API, basically a unified format for packaging your entire app with all its dependencies, regardless of what language you used, what libraries or framework you use, as long as it runs on Linux, basically. The only dependency is the Linux kernel. As long as you can run on the Linux kernel, basically, there is the possibility now of packaging your app in this unified standard format and then be able to run it with strong guarantees that wherever you run it, it will run in the same way. And that's very powerful because now, again, you can hand it to someone else and say, here, run it. And then this other person will run it and something predictable will happen. Right? And that's the key to automation. That's the key, again, to reliable testing, to things like, hey, here's an upgrade. Now I can send you this upgrade and it works.
Right.
And so, again, Linux containers makes that possible because now the Linux kernel effectively can be split up in little sandboxed areas, but it's the raw material. And what was missing was a tool to kind of glue all these raw capabilities together and deliver it to developers in a package that is usable, that makes sense.
Right. So DotCloud originally was taking advantage of Linux containers to kind of do this for everyone.
Yeah.
And you decided, with all the requests that are coming out, to go ahead and build, did you extract Docker from DotCloud, or did you kind of build a new, so it was actually extracted from DotCloud?
So a combination of both. Sorry, go ahead. I'll answer after.
Well, I'll have more for you, but go ahead and kind of explain that. Like, how did Docker separate itself from DotCloud?
So first of all, to answer your preliminary question, yes, that's definitely what we've been doing at DotCloud essentially forever. I mean, all the way back to 2008 when DotCloud was started, way before we even launched our first mass consumption product. Our thing was always taking advantage of Linux containers for fun and profit. That's basically what DotCloud is. And back in 2008, it was just a really, really weird thing to do. In fact, at the time, the LXC project, which is today the flagship project within the Linux kernel for all things containers, that project didn't exist, or maybe barely existed. I forget. It was, in any case, highly experimental and definitely not usable. What the Linux community had at the time was various patches. So there was one patch called vserver, which was supposed to emulate BSD jails. Another one called OpenVZ, which was maintained by a company called Parallels, which you may have heard of.
Yep.
And so back in the day, it was highly experimental territory to use containers anyway. But we did, and we had a lot of fun. And eventually, we became good at it and figured out ways to plug the components together, and then we launched DotCloud on top of it. So yes, definitely, DotCloud was our way of taking advantage of these capabilities, turning them into our kind of secret ingredient, and using that for our advantage, which was basically come out with a Heroku competitor that could do 10 times what Heroku could do, right? Because hey, it was completely agnostic to any language, of course, because it was containers under the hood. And then we started doing things like launching database services, right? DotCloud today has 15 different cloud services. We have a Redis service, we have a MongoDB service, we have a MySQL service, and all of those services, as diverse as they are actually under the hood, powered and operated by a single layer built on Linux containers. So it's actually the same code that automates the deployment of your MySQL database or your Rails or Python app when you're using DotCloud. Right. And behind that, there's an ops team that is ridiculously small. It's like 5 guys basically power these 15 cloud services, and this is all thanks to what we're able to extract out of this awesome technology that is Linux containers. I'm simplifying it just a bit because there are other components that gravitate around it, but really that's really kind of the starting point, that you have this unit of deployment, this thing that once you've bundled it, you know what's in it, and you can run it in a repeatable way. That's the key to everything.
Right. So fast forward 4 years, and now based on a lot of consumer feedback or people not liking the pricing or different reasons you said, you guys decided to pull Docker out of it. And so why was that decision finally made?
Our reasoning was basically, well, there was a combination of factors. The first was clearly the market has evolved. People are the market in general is getting more sophisticated. It's not like we're the only people in the world who know about Linux containers.
Understand Linux containers, right?
Yeah, there are lots of very smart systems engineers who are taking advantage of them, and we started seeing popping up on the radar starting in 2012. A bunch of kind of a new generation of cloud services that started kind of catching on and doing things that clearly made it very obvious that under the hood they were playing with containers as well. And we thought, okay, this was our differentiating advantage, but no differentiating advantage lasts forever.
Right.
And realistically, we're a startup. We're not a giant company with deep pockets. We can't possibly compete with everyone on every front, right? And so let's specialize, right? Let's adapt to this new world where a lot of players know about containers. What do we know best, right? Should we specialize on the SQL database? Should we be a MongoDB provider and go after the MongoDB players? Should we specialize on Rails and Python and JavaScript? And we realized in the end our true core, our true specialty is the underlying containers layer. It's the underlying layer itself. It's doing incredible things with containers, and how do we take advantage of that experience? The fact that we've been using and taking advantage of containers for many years. Mm-hmm. We have more production and real world experience with them than most companies in the world. As a business, how do we take advantage of that? And the answer is open source it to get the credit for the work we've done, right? So that's the business answer,
right? And
then I would say the engineer's answer is that, hey, that stuff's going to be open anyway. Like, it's just too awesome not to become an open standard, something that everybody uses and benefits from. That's just the awesome world we live in. Through things like open source, in the end, people will get a really easy to use, incredibly powerful open source implementation of that stuff. Eventually, it will become a standard. There will be foundations around it. It'll be awesome for everyone. Right. So if you believe that's going to happen no matter what, do you want to be part of, and if you can contribute to that, like you've got something to bring to the table because you happen to know that stuff, then do you want to be part of that awesome movement that is about to start? Or do you want to stay on the sidelines and say, no, I've got this closed implementation, mm-hmm. mine's better, but you'll never know exactly how much better because I'll never show you the code. Maybe you can do that if you're a big company. And even if you're a big company, I think it's stupid, but for a startup, it's you just.
Well, I mean, this show is on open source. I mean, it makes sense, right? That's it's open source, all the things, man.
Right. And then the burden's on us to prove that we can bring value as a business, and I think that's a great approach to business. It's win-win all the way, and I think we as a business, I'm not worried at all. We first of all, we know how to run them in production, which is very hard. I mean, I'm not going to preach to you that open source is good for business. But anyway, I
have a question though. Can I ask a question on this? Because this is where I'm trying to find the line. And for those listening, you definitely know I'm not a DevOps guy. So I come to this table and talk to Solomon and Andrew about this with asking for grace because I don't know all the details here. But when we look at Linux containers, so LXC containers out there, and then we look at Docker, what is Docker to LXC containers? That's where I'm trying to paint the picture from.
Yeah, good question, and a question I get a lot, so you're not alone. So I think there's there was an early answer, and then there's a kind of a larger answer. The early answer is LXC is the raw stuff, and Docker is what makes it palatable, what makes it usable. Someone there's a cool blog post describing Docker, and the guy who wrote the blog post compares it to Git. Like using LXC is kind of like using those underlying obscure commands that actually power Git, but no one understands how they work unless you've read like 10 pages of documentation. And you got people telling you like, oh, you could build a file system, and you could rebuild Dropbox until on top of that stuff, And then there are people who just want to check in source code and see diffs and merge, and for that stuff to be possible, you need a new set of commands that actually offer that level of interface. So it's an API that makes sense. It's a higher level API. It's a higher level UI. So that's one way to look at it.
I've heard people describe it as, and this probably is good for you too, Adam. Like Docker has the potential to be for platform as a service, as Chef did for infrastructure as a service. So it's just like a high level API to make it easier, less barrier of entry to get in there and be able to do what LXC allows you to do.
Gotcha.
That's definitely true. It makes it accessible. I think whatever platform as a service exactly means. Let's say it's whatever offers an API, a hosted API for developers to do something like that. Whether it's storing data in a database or deploying your code. I think we're at the end of an era where there was a very high barrier to entry to actually building a PaaS. Whether you were going to build a database service or build some sort of API-powered service like Twilio or Stripe or Mailgun, or whether you were going to deploy web apps like DotCloud, Heroku, etc. That was a very high bar. You had that's like very, very, very specific expertise. You had to be kind of that perfect combo of low-level systems engineering, ops, and at the same time, understanding the needs of a specific group of developers, and that's kind of a hard combo. And I think now we're entering a phase where all that stuff is being democratized, thanks to things like Docker. It's actually easier to build a PaaS that answers a very specialized need in the developer community without having to reinvent the wheel and become, a world-renowned expert in, load balancing between multiple EC2 regions and, 24/7 monitoring and, change management and log collection and metrics collection and all that stuff.
Right. So,
yeah.
To interject, so you said that kind of your claim to fame early on at DotCloud was, because you were leveraging the Linux containers, you were able to basically be, framework independent, language independent, like none of that mattered, right? So I remember early on there was, maybe not early on, but I remember, the Heroku and Engine Yard for Ruby, and then Node.jitsu came out for Node.js, and it was all these specialized services came out for these, one framework or one language, one environment. And then so you came out. So now, fast forward a few years, and most of those guys are supporting multiple environments. So does that mean that, would you consider yourself kind of a trendsetter in a way where now a lot of those guys are probably doing the same thing, right? Leveraging Linux containers to do this.
Yep, that's definitely true. I think the PaaS is a really young market. No one really knows how it works or how to make huge money with it because no one has. Like no one's won in PaaS. There's no giant success story in PaaS yet. Everyone's figuring it out, so that including us. So that's a warning before I say anything that gets me in trouble. But yeah, I think that, there was a trend where you started from the needs of a group of developers that you knew really well. So you focused, you attacked the vertical, and that's kind of startup 101. So you're Heroku, you're part of the Ruby community. I mean, these guys were a Rails development shop. And they knew the needs of the Rails community better than anyone. and they built a product for the Rails community, and it worked, right? And Node.js did the same thing for the Node.js community, et cetera, et cetera. And as that evolved, people started realizing, hey, actually, all these people, all these developers who are part of different communities, actually, if all have jobs or eventually will get jobs in companies that are not actually organized as highly verticalized tribes. Like there are very few companies that define themselves as Node.js companies or Ruby companies, right? Including maybe a few fringe, startups that are not actually the reality of the rest of the world, right? Most companies have, a real complicated, horrible mix of lots of different stuff running on lots of different technologies, with really, really overworked people trying to kind of plug it all together. Right. And every time that these guys hear about a new language, you're like, oh, shit. So on the one hand, you got developers.
Well, you said you got like 5 people running your DevOps team, right? I mean, you got 5 people on the team.
So what I'm talking about is the companies that we run applications for. These guys have developers writing apps in all sorts of crazy languages and using crazy databases, and they've got they've got the Cold Fusion stuff running on a server under a desk somewhere. Then they got the Java enterprise apps. Then they got the Ruby and Rails apps. Now they got the mobile apps with the Node.js backend and God knows what else. And they're trying to make sense of all that. And so these guys are very interested in a platform that is agnostic, that can run whatever they actually happen to need to run, and give them a freaking unified view of what's going on. They want the logs for the Node.js app and the Ruby app and the MongoDB database all in one freaking place so they can, know what's going on. And they'll pay good money for that. And that was our premise as a business for going.
So it's bringing all these different components of somebody's app or infrastructure under one roof.
Yeah. So that's the holy grail, right? You want to be the place that runs all the stuff. You want to be the provider of the unified provider. And so I think that's kind of phase 2 of PaaS, where people realized you can get a lot of developers to start playing with you by being very specialized and simple for a specific use case, a specific language or framework or whatever. But then eventually, if you want to keep that guy, or at least keep his business as his app grows, as his business grows, etc. Or as he brings his colleagues in and tries to convince his boss to use you, you're going to need to be more flexible, more customizable. You're going to need to support more things. So you're going to need basically Linux containers. And so I think now people are realizing that. I mean, by people, I mean the PaaS providers. And now you're seeing more multi-language. Yeah.
So maybe this is an obvious question, or maybe not, I don't know, maybe I'm not seeing it, but by open sourcing Docker, that must have taken a lot of thought, because you're in a way enabling your competitors to do things that you're doing privately. So how did that decision come about?
So this saying, it's probably, I don't even know, I think no one knows who actually said it, but the whole thing about when there's a gold rush, you want to be selling the shovels.
Yeah.
The whole point of PaaS was that while the web startup gold miners are mining, you the PaaS provider want to be selling them the shovels, right? And then now all of a sudden the shovel shops are realizing, hey, we need to expand our technology really, really fast so that we can support cross-language and we can kind of expand our offering in these organizations. We can sell more stuff to these companies. We need to sell more shovels fast. And actually, by the way, it's getting real easy to make shovels because there's a lot of money in shovels. So what do we do? How do we differentiate? Oh, that guy over there is making, I don't know, shovel making machines. And so that's us, right? We're like, we're the best at making shovels. Here, we'll help you make your own shovels because we're transitioning to the business of selling the machines that let you make the shovels.
So you're becoming platform as a service.
I hope that doesn't become a word, but in a way, that was the key. That's the key bet. It is the key bet. Is that this is a transition, and this is a real economy now. It's a real market. Selling stuff to developers is becoming a real it's a new market, and when there's a market, there is now a space for specialized vendors that address that market. So I think increasingly you're going to see that people that used to be our competitors are now more natural partners or natural customers.
Right. So the popularity of Docker just took off. I mean, like, it was kind of mind-boggling to see it just explode. And I don't know if your lightning talk at PyCon was kind of the impetus of that, but it was just crazy to see this just blow up. And then, but I guess what you really benefited from was, I saw Docker from DotCloud was blowing up. So did you see actual boost in DotClouds?
That was my next question. Is like, how did this impact business? By open
was
sourcing
DotCloud
this?
business booming from this too?
Yeah, so it definitely benefits directly. I mean, it's.
Was it like a hockey stick, or was it like a 90-degree turn?
I guess 90-degree is. It's like
super up versus.
Yeah, 90-degree is a pretty nice hockey stick already. It's not. it's kind of a two-step process. Like, step one is obviously it's exposure for DotCloud as a company, and as a result, we're selling more of our stuff, and that's great. And in fact, I don't know if you guys caught this, but as part of this crazy buzz, which we didn't really see coming, and actually it started before we were ready. If you remember, the whole thing was leaked, and we had to rush to actually ship the source code ahead of schedule because it wasn't ready.
And fire the developer that leaked it.
Oh boy!
I don't know. I mean, and here's a funny story. I mean, on the one hand, I'm saying, oh, it was leaked, and the other hand, here I was giving a talk at PyCon. But the thing you have to understand is we were kind of cautiously, one step at a time, showing Docker to a select group of people that we knew would be interested, and so by the time we gave that talk at PyCon, about 40 companies had seen Docker, played with Docker, were actively checking the repository, looking at the progress. So we kind of had this kind of miniature, like closed but open source at the same time, if that makes sense. And we were at maybe I won't name names, but a lot of companies played with it and are still playing with it. And along the way we thought, hey, there's PyCon, and we know a lot of the guys there. Surely there are people there interested in Linux containers. Let's just get together with a few of them. Let's just give this obscure talk that no one will be interested in except the Uber container geeks. Plus, it's a lightning talk. It'll be in a back room. There'll be like 15 people, 12 of which will actually not care. And we'll meet two really interested people, and then we'll add them to the private beta. That was kind of the idea. And in fact, you
got a standing ovation from everybody.
Well, no, the thing is, lightning talks at PyCon happen to be a really big deal, and it's in the main room with 800 people in it or something. And I didn't have slides. I mean, you've seen the video, right? It was like Hello World. It was the least prepared talk.
I know. I loved watching you in the video when you were like typing the commands, and you would have to like delete because you forgot part of the command, and it was just like real.
I was so stressed out. I was like, oh, 800 people are watching me type Hello World. Great. But they liked it, so that was great. But so the result is, of course, someone in there said, "Hey, I'm going to put this on Hacker News," and then there was buzz. But there was a point in all this I kind of forgot where I was going.
Oh, that's okay.
We're talking about the impact back to your business. I was kind of surprised they only gave you 5 minutes, though.
Yeah, I wasn't done.
They're like everyone is like at the edge of their seat as you're wrapping up your talk, and they're kicking you off the stage because they literally gave you like 4.5, maybe 4 minutes and 15 seconds if they're being generous. Yeah. And then they're booting you off the stage, not because you weren't talking about something cool, but they were just so adamant about their timeline.
They're running a tight ship. I mean, those guys are well organized. Yeah. Anyway, it was there was a lot of cool conversation afterwards. Or PyCon is really nice. It's a really cool chill conference. It was a nice place. I'm glad it happened there and not in a trade like a more formal trade show or something. That would have been boring.
Yeah. So one thing that's really interesting about Docker, and I guess DotCloud in general is that you're using Go. For some reason, that's just very interesting to me. So where did the thought from? Why did you guys pick Go instead of something else?
So, and it actually gets even more interesting when you know that 90% of the code we've written at DotCloud since the very beginning has been Python. We're historically a Python shop. But at the same time, we've written code in various languages. I mean, we do advocate, polyglot deployment or whatever. The possibility of using multiple languages. So we have to at least use more than one, to be credible. So we have a few pieces in Node.js, and we started dabbling in Go, but nothing crazy. But we liked it because we're systems guys, so we've written a lot of C, and it's like C but nicer. And so what really decided it is, the very, very first versions of Docker were written in Python because they were basically a rewrite, a gradual, standard pragmatic refactoring of the DotCloud, the core DotCloud platform, which, has been at this point in production for over 2 years. So, that's what happens to production systems used by real customers over many years. Things tend to pile up, and at some point you need to kind of just clean things up and refactor and, take advantage of the lessons learned, yada, yada, yada. And so we started this project, and at some point we kind of had this discussion internally about, hey, this refactoring is actually going to be limited in scope because, we got to drop it in, and it has to be completely reverse compatible. We can't just, break people's applications. I mean, there's a whole process to running people's apps in production. And so we were faced with this decision: do we continue with a kind of a conservative, gradual rewrite? I mean, refactor, or do we do something more radical and kind of widen the loop, if that makes sense? Kind of go off and make it a separate component, and say, hey, you know what? It's okay if it doesn't benefit the platform right away, but then we'll have kind of free reign to really take advantage of all the lessons learned, do something clean, something nice, something less frustrating. Because one of the problems when you cover so many languages and technologies is, you say yes to too many feature requests, and then you have to support those features forever.
Right.
Yeah.
So we wanted to kind of the result is you get a lot of baggage. So anyway, we were really tempted by the second option, right? Clean and rewrite. But then how do you avoid the death trap of, the rewrite that never ends? And 2 years later, you haven't shipped anything. All the customers are gone because nothing's moving, just
right.
That kind of stuff. So the answer was, let's make it an open source component. Let's make it really, really small and concise so that it can be used on its own. Like the first iteration can be used on its own by other people. And then let's later circle back and plug it back into .cloud.
So have you gotten to that point?
So in some places, not on the core production platform, no. I mean, they are very, very direct relatives, obviously. I mean, it is still a rewrite of the .cloud platform. So in a way, it's kind of V2 of the core of .cloud, right?
Right.
And new stuff is now 100% built on Docker. Existing stuff will be, is being transitioned, following a pace that makes sense. I mean, a lot of our customers, they're glad that we're getting buzz and they're happy for us, but they just want their app to run right now. So
right.
Anyway, so back to the question about Go. So we made that decision of making it a rewrite and open sourcing it, et cetera. And one thing we wanted to avoid was cutting corners. If it was going to be a clean rewrite, it had to be a real clean rewrite with no cheating. And it's really tempting to cheat. You're like, we've solved this problem a year ago. It was really a pain in the ass to solve the first time. Do we really need to write it a second time? I'll just copy paste that little piece over there, And so, I wanted to avoid that. And there were two other reasons for using Go. The second reason was that it has this really nice property of compiling to a static binary, which you just drop somewhere and it runs, and that is just awesome. And it's awesome because it's just really practical from an ops point of view. When you got a lot of servers to run, you have other shit to do. You don't want to deal with like dragging all sorts of dependencies and following like a 50-page tutorial and setting it up. You just want drop the binary, run it. Good. Let's moving on. And it has the added benefit of being really easy to use by regardless of what your language of choice is. And the DevOps community, the community of people who automate the deployment of servers and deal with that kind of stuff, the kind of people who are naturally attracted to Docker, who are the target of Docker, are fragmented bunch of people. There are people who do everything in Ruby. Obviously, there's Chef, Puppet. There's a lot of tools around that. There's a big Python community, and then there's a big Java community. And those are kind of the three main groups. And then there's Clojure. There's cool stuff in Clojure. There's all sorts of cool stuff. None of these guys, as a general rule, will use a tool if it's written in if it's written in the opposite language, and not really because they don't like the language, but because it comes with strings attached. Like if you're a Ruby shop and you're evaluating a Python tool, it can be a real pain in the ass to actually run that Python tool because now you got to deal with Python packages and dependencies and virtual env and all these things that you're not familiar with. And if they break, how do you go ahead and hack with them? And so Go is a nice kind of middle ground. It's a binary, you drop it, everyone can use it. And if you want to hack on it, it looks a lot like C. So it's kind of neutral. And the third reason is really just, it's trendy and
you
want your project to be adopted. So if you can give people one more excuse to play with it, then hey, why not? And it's just a really cool language.
So the biggest communities on DotCloud, would you say they're Ruby, Python, and Java?
Yeah, I mean that would be my guess. I mean, I didn't really run although maybe I should, but that would be my guess.
Cool.
Just from experience, yeah.
It's really cool then to see. I mean, if you look at the GitHub repository, you got almost 2,000 stars and almost 200 forks, and it's cool to see that a lot of people maybe don't know more than just the language that they work in, but obviously Docker is a cool enough project where people are probably even willing to learn Go, and it's a good opportunity to learn Go if they don't know it. So yeah, it's cool to see this growing up. So you have plans then to bring Docker back into DotCloud, and do you have any kind of time frame and where you would see that happening?
Well, I mean, what is already happening is that 100% of everything we're doing as a company is built on Docker going forward. It's 100%. We've just made it started out as an experiment. We hoped that people would like it. Then we realized, oh shit, people like it. And then we realized, wow, this is not stopping. Not only are people using it, but people are actually actively contributing to it. There's a real community that basically, you mentioned the forks. The forks to me are even more interesting than the stars because it means people are actually playing with it and contributing back. I think we've got, over 20 people now who are authors in the broad sense of the term. Maybe they only, they contributed a fix to the README, but there are really impressive people in the Docker community. I'm like, I look at the IRC channel, I'm like, wow, where do these guys come from? They're awesome. I don't know them. And so as soon as we saw that, we're like, this is bigger than even we planned. This is what DotCloud is going to be about now. And so we've made it very clear that this is not just a side project. We're building, we're going forward. DotCloud is going to be built on Docker.
Cool,
and part of that is bring it back into the existing product. But, also it's going to be building extensions to that product and maybe new products, natively on top of Docker from day one.
Yeah. So is it a nice feeling like, when you were a closed shop, for lack of a better term, and people would come to you with feature requests and you'd have to either, go through the process of, debating internally if this is acceptable and then who's going to work on it and all that. But now somebody comes to you about Docker with a feature request and you can tell them, hey, fork it and start to work on it.
Yeah, that is a nice feeling. Although then they do it and then you have to review the code but it's a good problem to have.
Yeah, well, and you bring up a good point, and that's something that, open source is great, right? Because more often than not, the community will kind of gather around it and contribute to something that they find useful. For a company like you guys, how have you handled the problem of, roles in the company. You get used to doing things a certain way, but now you have to kind of manage this. And one thing we like to talk about on the changelog a lot is open source sustainability. So now you have to kind of manage this open source project, right? And what that means is, standards, code reviews, handling issues, all that stuff.
Just in general, being a leader. Yeah.
Yeah, leading the project. So internally, does the whole team kind of take responsibility for that, or how is that? What does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, it's been. I mean, when I say we've reorganized around Docker, I mean we have truly reorganized in a very significant way. It's been a big change for everyone in the team, for the company, even in terms of strategy. And also, I mean, for me personally, I'm the founder and CEO. I've been kind of gradually transitioning over the last couple of years from the guy who wrote the code to the guy who wrote the code with other dudes to the guy who wrote less and less code to the guy who raised money and, hired people and, ran meetings and all that stuff, which is very interesting. But, I ended up in this kind of product-focused CEO, right? I would kind of make calls when needed, but mostly, the smart people have a tendency to do smart things on their own. So, and all of a sudden, by chance, I ended up actually being the guy pushing Docker forward as a side project, mostly because the rest of the DotCloud team didn't have time. They had more serious things to do with, actually running the real product. And then suddenly Docker was no longer a side project. So for me personally, it's been a huge transition because I'm the maintainer, right? I review all the pull requests. Now, thank God, I have Guillaume join as a maintainer, so he reviews and merges things, and the pool is growing. And I'll get to what that means as a process. But so, starting with my experience personally, it's been a big change and it's really fun. Like it's good to be back to coding every day. I maybe for another time, I'll talk about what it means as a CEO. Mostly means just twice as much work and
you didn't love the whole process of raising funds and dealing with board members and all that.
It's fun and I still do it. It's one way or the other. That's a transition that has to be finished. Like at some point in the future, it's fun to do both.
Mm-hmm.
At some point in the future, I'll have to end up being doing only one. So does that mean handing over again the whole technical side once the training process of other maintainers is completed, and I go back to being a CEO, or maybe I hire another CEO. Who knows? But right now it's both, and it's fun. For the rest of the team, what we've done is basically we've said, okay, we've split the team in two as a start. And I hope this is on topic, but I think it is. It's about the sustainable open source, right? So
go for it. Yeah,
we've split the team in two. Half of the team keeping the lights on like, okay, we got this existing product, got production apps, we got customers. No matter what, in this crazy period of 1 or 2 months where people are going crazy and we don't know what to do with all these pull requests basically falling from the sky. Let's split the team into two, and half of the team keeps doing things as usual, and the other team works with Solomon, and we kind of build this open source process. And so what we've done, and this is on the open source side, a big decision we've made, which is very important, and I think it's the best decision we've made in this whole thing, is that we've opened the process to contributing to Docker completely, and I mean 100%. There is no difference in how you contribute to Docker based on where you work. In other words, the process that a DotCloud employee goes through to check code into Docker or to influence or discuss the priorities of Docker, the design decisions, all that stuff is 100% the same as if you're not a DotCloud employee, which means that if you're willing and able and you got the time and you're interested, the prospects for implication and credit and influence over the project are exactly the same. You can be a core committer if you want to, and you can, if you pass the standards and if you involve yourself enough. And we don't yet have a core committer. I mean, it's only 2 of us who can actually merge pull requests. And Guillaume works at DotCloud, but soon enough there's going to be a core committer That doesn't work at DotCloud, I'm sure of it. And I mean, I can see very smart people putting a lot of energy, and that's going to be an awesome moment. And I think it's really important.
What was the process to come up with that idea, though, to have that the same process for me if I forked it and wanted to contribute? Was that your idea? Was it the team's idea? How did you come up with that idea?
That was me. Basically,
me right here. Sure. That was me. That was me.
Yeah, I mean,
gotcha.
You asked. So.
No, I like that. I like the way you responded. That was me.
Basically, here's the thing. It was kind of unusual territory because here I was, kind of the maintainer of an open source project, and I'm not the guy supposed to be writing code, as a day job anymore. And we have this whole engineering team, and Sam is our director of engineering. He's got this whole process in place. I mean, we're a highly organized company. You have to when you're running, again, you're running apps in production, and there was this problem of steering resources away from the core platform. I mentioned before we split the team in two. In fact, we split it in two, but we didn't split it in two equal parts. Most of the resources have to stay allocated to the main product. And at the same time, if we're really betting the farm on Docker, it needs to move fast. And we've been really, really bent on making Docker move as fast as possible. We've shipped a lot of stuff. The only way to keep shipping fast is to get a lot of people working on it. And the only way to get a lot of people working on it, if you can't afford to hire hundreds of people, is to set up a process that actually makes it possible potentially for hundreds of people to contribute. And we're a long way from hundreds of people checking in code, but I mean that's the trajectory. We're being aggressive about it.
You also said that you're going to build DotCloud on top of Docker, and right now you have a disclaimer saying Docker is still under heavy development, so it seems like it's stable, but maybe not as much as it possibly could be to actually build DotCloud on top of it. Is that right?
Yeah. So
so obviously you would want to put a lot of energy into it if you're gonna, build DotCloud on top of Docker. You're gonna want to get it to a point where it's even more stable than it's at.
And we are, and we're gradually. I mean, every day there's a little more of our resources going as a company going towards Docker than the core product because it feeds back, right? So it's an investment. But the only way this can possibly work is by really, building a real community of people who are outside of the company and actually own the project with us, if that makes sense. About production readiness, you're definitely right. It's not, you can't run an application in production on Docker. Actually, it turns out you can because I found out that at least one company does. But, hey, if it works for them, it will be production ready soon. And the other thing also is that Docker is a great development and testing tool. So a lot of people actually use Docker to develop and test in an automated way. And then there are ways to, you can still take the result of your work, take your Docker containers and export them into any environment that you actually use in production. So there's a bridge there. Docker doesn't actually need to be entirely production ready all across the entire life cycle of your app to be useful. You can use it on a segment of that life cycle. Does that make sense? So you can start using it as a dev and build tool, and if you get more comfortable and you feel like it's ready, you can get a good feel for it. You can start using it the next stage, which is usually QA, continuous delivery, things like that. And then if you're even more comfortable, then eventually you can say, hey, you know what, I'm going to run this in production or, production for this small app and not for the big app yet.
Right.
It's a gradual process, right? It starts with the day one of development, and then it moves along it matures along with the application.
So the only supported distros are looks like the latest Ubuntu's. Is that right? Officially supported?
Yeah. So, I guess there are two answers. Yeah. The only officially supported distro today, where you can drop that Docker binary and run it, is Ubuntu. But there are officially supported install instructions for going from a Mac laptop to a running Docker setup, a Windows machine to running Docker setup, and any other Linux distro to running Docker setup. And usually that means going through, deploying a VM, right? So you add a VM to your machine, and then on top of that VM, you run Docker.
Mm-hmm. So last week on the show, we had Mitchell from Vagrant, and looks like I got Docker up and running pretty easily using Vagrant on my machine.
Yeah, that's the way we recommend it. If you've got a Mac or a Windows machine, just use Vagrant, and Vagrant will, in our case, what Vagrant does that is really, really awesome is, if you got an OS that's not supported, it's a nice and automated way to stand up a VirtualBox VM and boom, install something on it. In our case, Docker. So that's really nice.
So it's funny because, and one of the things that Mitchell said, so obviously I'm a Mac guy, and so I'm on a laptop, I'm on a MacBook. Yep. So early on in Vagrant's lifetime, they decided we need to support Windows. Like that was one of the, not Mitchell, but I think his name is John, said, we need to have Windows support baked in. And so they did, right? And, now fast forward again, number of years. And are you guys thankful that you're able to use Vagrant on Windows to get Docker up and running?
Yeah, I mean, the Vagrant's a really cool project. Right now there are more people definitely using Docker from Macs than from Windows machines, but there definitely are Windows machines. And from experience on the developer base, on DotCloud in general, a lot of people use Windows. I think there's kind of this San Francisco bubble. I mean, we're a San Francisco-based company. There's this kind of San Francisco Silicon Valley bubble world of no one uses Windows anymore. But yeah, actually, a lot of people do. And if you want to be taken seriously, you gotta your tool has to support it. So yeah, we're in general. I will say this: that we have a philosophy of not reinventing the wheel. That sounds kind of obvious, but we will take every opportunity to reuse other people's work if it makes sense, and if it allows us to focus on the hard parts that no one got to. I mean, there are lots of examples of that. One example is using Vagrant, because hey, we could start by writing code that automatically spins up VMs from Windows and installs Docker on it. But that would be time we wouldn't be spending on more interesting parts of Docker, right? So we're using Vagrant, and hey, everyone's happy. It's easier to use Docker, and a lot of people discover Vagrant actually through Docker. I saw a lot of tweets saying, "Hey, I got 2 projects for the price of one. I discovered Vagrant." So
that's awesome.
Another example would be, LXC itself. There is an ambiguity actually when in the word LXC. It stands for Linux containers, but it can mean 2 things. It can mean the component inside the Linux kernel that makes containers possible, and it can mean the higher level tools, the binaries that that the command that you run on your Linux box to make calls to those kernel facilities, and both are called LXC. So there's LXC, the kernel component that you never see as a user, and then there's LXC, the command line tool. And one thing that we could have done was bypass the LXC command line tool and make calls to the kernel functions directly. Because really, what we're really going after is the kernel's capabilities. That's where the heavy lifting's done, right? In a way, the LXC command line tools are themselves convenience wrappers, higher level tools for using the kernel's features, right? So, we could bypass them, but bypassing them is work. And the developers of the LXC tools have actually done good work. They've tested it. They've added these nice conveniences. So that's another example. Just like we use Vagrant, we actually make calls to the ALXC command line tools, so we don't waste time reinventing the wheel.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like where Docker's at right now. It's so young. It's so early in the process. It's very exciting. I mean, to see where this is going to go. So for you right now, where Docker is at, where would you like to see it kind of go over the next 6 months to a year?
So there's kind of two main things. Over the last few weeks, we've realized that people are using Docker as a build tool. So initially, the job of Docker was specifically given a container in the right format, run it in a guaranteed, repeatable way, and define the format, the executable format, right? Like, write the spec, standardize what it means to run a container, and share that standard with the world, and show an implementation of it. So, in other words, the run part, running things. And that was, that's the core of Docker, and you can run things in a very reusable way, in a very portable way, and et cetera, et cetera. And then on top of that, we saw people building on top of that functionality to build their software. Because, running a container is one thing, but how did you get that container in the first place? Like, who built it? Like, who put it together? Mm-hmm. And it turns out Docker itself can be used to put together your container step by step, layer by layer, in a really cool and convenient way. And it solves that problem of defining dependencies. And so that became a pattern. People started using Docker like that, installing a base image and then installing a Debian package they were interested in, then downloading a library and dropping it in the right place, installing, Unicorn, then installing the version of Ruby they're interested in, the gems they're interested in, and all of that layer by layer using our container versioning system. And, I don't want to go in crazy details, but so that use case kind of evolved. And as a result, you can use Docker for build and for run. And so these are the two directions we're pushing. We want Docker to be a better build tool. And so literally you can Dockerize your app. I've realized that's a term now.
Is it really?
It's pretty cool. Yeah. So Dockerizing your app means...
Well, I heard you say containerize, at least in your documentation somewhere, too.
Yeah, you containerize things, but Dockerize is shorter. And I don't know. It's funny because I did not come up with the name Docker. I initially thought it was really bad and sounded terrible. And I actually had this secret plan of convincing everyone to change it before we launched, but then it got leaked and I never got the chance, and it kind of grew on me. I kind of like it now. So anyway, so Dockerizing your app means adding to your Git repository or to your source code a file called a Docker file, with instructions on how to go from naked source code to full-blown container ready to run. And usually that file is like 5 lines. It's really simple. It's basically like shell commands to run. It's like apt-get install that, pip install that, gem install that, whatever. And it's dead simple, but at the same time, it goes from source code to freaking full-blown container ready to run. And you can hand it to someone, and they can run it on an EC2 machine. They can run it on their VM. They can run it, anywhere they want. And you don't have to give them any off-band information. You just say, here it is. You can run it. And that is really awesome. So, I want that to be easier because I think it's just a really cool way to use Docker. Mm. And then, obviously, I want, once you've produced that Docker container, I want it to be more useful in more places. So there are people today saying, obviously, hey, I use Red Hat, or I use, this or that distro, or I have this version of the kernel, and today I can't use Docker containers. I can't run them because Docker doesn't support this distro or doesn't support this version of the kernel. So we want to, widen the scope, make running Docker containers possible in more places. And that also means part of making it possible to run in more places involves things like allowing for more customizations. Like there are a lot of requests, especially for ops or shops, like ops engineers that already have a setup. They have a storage system, they have a networking system in place, and they have a process manager, and they like Docker, but they would like to bend it to fit into their existing system. And I say, obviously we want that to be possible. So there are a lot of integration projects, and for integrations you need nice, clean APIs. So I guess that was a long answer, but A, I want Docker to make it easier to build your source code into a container that can run anywhere, and B, I want it to be easier to run that container on any server.
Yeah, this whole time we kind of got through most of this call, and we haven't mentioned Docker Registry yet. I'm just wondering if I missed it or if we didn't cover that, and it seems like it fits nicely into that feature you just painted.
Definitely, yeah. It's kind of the link between the two. That when you build your source code into a container, the logical step after that is you want to make that container accessible, right? You want to share it, and if it's open source software, sharing it means, hey, you want every person on earth to be able to download it and run it if they want. If it's private and it's your own code, it has credentials in it, it's not open source. Sharing might just mean, hey, I want it to get it from the build server to the production server, or on a scale out to 10 servers. Right. So that's also sharing. It's moving bytes around. To share, you need some sort of infrastructure to move things around and discover the right container and download it, etc. And that's what the registry is. So the registry is
where does that live at now?
A cloud
Where
service
can you see that
we've put together at DotCloud. It's the primary way you interact with it is by typing the command docker pull, right, or docker push. So right now, like if you install Docker from scratch, fresh, the first command you'll probably run is something like docker run Ubuntu bash, which means, hey, run the shell in an Ubuntu system, or docker run CentOS ls, show me the files in a new CentOS container. When you type that command, Docker, figures out that you want to run an Ubuntu container, a container called Ubuntu. It doesn't have it, so it will automatically connect to the registry, which is this publicly accessible place. Think of it like GitHub for containers ready to run, right? Mm-hmm. And it will download it. And it has a very efficient way of downloading, it's just like a git pull, actually. It'll only download the parts that it needs. So if it's already downloaded a prior version, it'll only download the diff, which is really nice. Mm-hmm. And then it'll run it. And so the registry is this place, this API that we've put up for free to make Docker more useful, where you can download other people's containers or upload your own, right? Since once you've built your code into a container, you upload it to the registry, and other people can share it, can use it. So that's I guess cool. It's the link between build and run.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like we could talk about that for we're going to have you in a few months as this thing grows again to talk about where it's gone. It's very exciting.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to check back in with you because we want to hear your 6-month year goal and see if it comes to fruition, and we'll obviously be there helping you along. So in between now and then, anything we can do at the changelog to help you spread the word about the awesomeness of Docker, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We'll do whatever we can to help.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
So for people who have listened to the changelog regularly, they'll know this, but for anyone who's new, we kind of have 2 questions that we like to ask at the end of all of them, and just to give you a chance to kind of participate. So first one, Solomon, is we kind of look for what would be a call to arms or somewhere where that you would like to see the open source community get involved in Docker?
Well, I guess there's a general answer. Besides the obvious, try it, use it, report bugs, come hang out on the IRC channel, kind of get involved in any way possible. We are extremely welcoming of any interaction. Like we will never make fun of someone for making a really small fix. Like every fix counts. Every question, there is no stupid question. We're we're very grateful of any interaction. It means you're interested. So check it out, ask questions. And then more specifically, I talked about that really cool word, Dockerize.
Yeah.
I'm just really excited about that concept. I think it's really powerful. It solves a lot of problems that I've ran into as a developer. There are a lot of people Dockerizing their apps, Dockerizing famous open source software, Dockerizing databases, frameworks, libraries. So my call to arms would be try and Dockerize something and tell us how it went. Share it with us. Right now we're, every time someone sends us a cool example of software they've packaged to run in Docker, we're really excited. We tell everyone about it. Just tell us and we'll share it with the whole world. And probably you'll hit a bug too, and then you should report that.
Cool. So our last question, who would you like to kind of give a shout out to as your programming hero?
I'm glad you allowed me to prepare for that one. I realize I'm not a very learned person when it comes to the giants on whose shoulders we stand on. But there is one guy that I've always been super impressed with. I guess it's kind of a classic, but I don't know if you know this guy Fabrice Bellard. He's this French dude, also known as the author of QEMU.
Okay.
What's his GitHub handle?
Or we can link that up in the show notes.
He has written at least half a dozen pieces of software that each individually would easily get him a place in the pantheon of coders, but he wrote like 6 of them. And he's incredibly productive. He's the guy, I don't know, the most recent thing I saw by him is he's the guy who got a Linux kernel to actually boot in a browser in JavaScript. You guys remember that?
Vaguely. I mean,
anyway, so it's like just one example. He's just he never stops. And it's kind of refreshing to see someone that productive. I mean, FFmpeg is, it's the foundation of video processing, right? It's the video processing open source software. That's him. QEMU is like a really effective and very helpful piece of virtualization software. So it was kind of a stepping stone to virtualization.
And I missed it though. What is his name?
Fabrice Bellard. Fabrice Bellard.
Okay.
Bellards. I feel like I'm butchering his name.
We'll definitely have to put that in the show notes.
Yeah, he's awesome. And that's the thing. I've never seen tweets by him. Probably tweets, I don't know. But he's not like doesn't seem to be someone who's cultivating his personal brand or whatever. He's just writing awesome code and seems to enjoy it, and we're all benefiting from it. I mean, he's the good side of open source incarnate.
He's behind the Tiny C compiler. I know that.
Nice.
Yeah. He's anyway. I've never met him, but I just picture him as this really cool guy.
Well, we'll have that's awesome. Though. Thanks for plugging him, and we always enjoy. I guess the surprises sometimes, even not so much surprises that you choose somebody who may not have gotten all the limelight that some developers get when it comes to open source contributions and what they contribute and what they create. So it's always good, and it also helps our audience to, and those who are enthusiasts of software and the intersection of software development and this open source world that we're kind of crafting away at. So it's really fun to share that. But Solomon, thank you so much for joining us. Andrew, thanks for asking so many great questions. I definitely lean upon you today when it comes to the DevOps side. I sit back and listen very closely and hope one day that I can be such a hacker. But and this,
you guys were great. Thanks so much for. This is really a cool conversation.
Yeah, man. And this is our first time here on 5x5. So for those of you who are longtime 5x5 listeners and first-time changelog listeners, we're here to stay. 5x5.tv/changelog. live every Tuesday at 5 o'clock. You can tune in as you normally do if you got the app. Watch out for a push notification, and if you didn't get it, you need to go in your settings and turn that on for the changelog as well as Founders Talk, because I host Founders Talk. So that'll be live tomorrow, same time on Wednesday. But thanks again for tuning in. Let's say goodbye, guys.
All right. Thanks so much, Solomon. I really enjoyed the conversation, man.
Thanks to you guys.